This 13-year-old camera. It's taught me more about filmmaking than any other camera I've rented, borrowed or owned since. And in 2025, I'm bringing it back. As filmmakers working on a range of projects from short films to documentaries, indie projects to no budget projects, some cameras just manage to stick with us. And for me, it's the Canon 600D. Or Rebel T3i if you're in the US. I've without a doubt shot more projects on this than I have any other camera, and probably will ever shoot on any other camera. Back in the early 2010s, this was part of the DSLR Revolution, when filmmakers realised that you could get a cinematic look without a huge budget. The Canon 5D Mark II was everywhere, but if you couldn't afford one, YouTube filmmakers told you to grab this or the T3i. I mean, even when I went to college around this time to study film, they gave us these exact same cameras, which I was already using in my own personal time, so this kind of felt a bit redundant to me. A lot of people treated and kind of disregarded the 600D as a learner camera. You know, something that you used to practice with before you got a real DSLR, or maybe a cinema camera if you had that kind of money. Something that wasn't for serious work.
The camera in my hand costs more than the camera in your hand. How ridiculous is that?
It's probably all for you to look better.
Probably.
Like, it's probably nicer footage looking up there. I don't know how people do this, but here's the thing. Most of my 2010s filmography was shot on this. I'm talking short films, freelance gigs, my first ever documentary, a ton of YouTube work, and obviously my college projects at the time, but also the short films I was making in secondary school before college, and then my own personal short films in university as well. And I'm still kind of proud of how they look, especially since they were captured on said learner camera. I actually got this back in December 2012. I think it was the 27th of December. I'd saved up my money throughout birthdays and Christmases up to this point in hopes of being able to afford this camera. It felt like I had finally unlocked that next crucial step in my young filmmaking journey. I finally had interchangeable lenses, far more manual control over my image, and something genuinely kind of HD. It was a big deal for me to get this camera when I did, because I started my filmmaking journey when I was pretty young. I started it around the age of 9, and you know, I went through the tape camcorders. I had the little digital cameras that barely recorded in like maybe even 240p, and then I eventually got a camcorder that supposedly shot in HD. It's actually the one that I've been using as my B cam up until this point, and you guys can tell that is that's not HD. I mean, that's just mush. And this is back when the YouTube channels were all raving about the Canon 5D Mark II. And it feels like we've all kind of forgotten about how big of a deal it was that we could finally have access to interchangeable lenses, HD quality, and something that genuinely gave us a bit more of a cinematic look to our films. But like, I was like 15, 16 when I was looking into getting this camera. I did not have the money to be able to afford that camera. But there was another camera that I occasionally heard of that YouTubers would sometimes compare it to that was a lot cheaper and basically the little cousin to the Canon 5D. And that was the Canon 550D and eventually the Canon 600D. Or Rebel T3i. And I thought it looked fine. Maybe the 5D had more clarity, maybe it had better colour science, but to me, it really wasn't that far off, especially considering it was quite a bit cheaper than the 5D. Now, I didn't quite have access to Amazon or eBay because I was a bit too young at the time, so how did I go about getting it? Well, it was through my dad. He was very motivated by me wanting to get this camera to the point where he just basically said, you know what, I'll just get it through my eBay account and send it to you. So that's how I got my camera. And I remember the day he gave me it, because I remember also telling him that I won't have to update this camera anytime soon, that I could shoot feature films on this. All I have to really worry about is changing the lenses to access the better quality on the sensor or something, and I was very grateful that he went ahead and did that for me. Of course, that whole lens thing's kind of the inverse of how these things actually work, because I've kept the lenses. I'm shooting on my 50mm lens right now from the Canon, but I don't shoot on the 600D anymore. So I was kind of wrong about that, but I wasn't actually that wrong that I'd be using it for a very long time, because I actually used this camera all the way up until mid-2019. So we're talking like a proper 5 or 6, 7 years run with this one camera. Because in 2019, that's when I updated to my Sony A7S, which is what I'm shooting this on. Quick tech rundown. I'm not going to bore you with the outdated tech spec talk or anything, but the gist of the video side of things on the Canon 600D is, it's a 1080p DSLR capable of 24 frames per second or 25 frames per second at that resolution. It can actually be pushed to 50 frames per second for a bit of slow motion work, but the resolution is dropped to 720p, so especially these days you're sacrificing even more visual clarity. The 600D is an APS-C crop sensor camera, so that is something to take into account if you're looking to buy one of these for some reason. Because shooting on a 50mm nifty 50 lens that we've all owned at some point is actually more like shooting at 85mm or something like that because of the crop. I mean, it's easier to just show you. Here's a comparison with my A7S, which is a full frame camera, and this is the APS-C crop. The 600D has one huge benefit over a lot of modern cameras in that it has a huge lens support system. Because this is a crop sensor camera, but it's an EF and EFS compatible camera, which gives you so much access to cheap lenses, and I think the EF lens selection is one of the biggest selections of lenses you have access to, just in general. So it won't be hard to pick up one of these lenses anytime soon, and it will be relatively cheap compared to some of the more expensive, more hard to get lenses of more modern cameras. And of course, speaking of lenses, over the years I've had my go-to lenses, such as the 50mm, which has a beautiful f1.8 aperture. I also had the 24mm. This was a EFS lens, meaning it wasn't compatible with full frame EF cameras, but it's on the cheaper side and it's quite nice. It does open it up more to what a 50mm probably is more like on these cameras. These two were my main go-to lenses for a long time, probably from between 2016 and 2019. In fact, I still use the 50mm on my Sony A7S to this day. Through an adapter, of course, because it doesn't naturally fit with the E-mount on that camera, but still. And of course, I also had the 18 to 55mm kit lens. This is the lens that usually is bundled with this body of this camera, but if you go on the second-hand route, which obviously you will be because they don't make these cameras anymore, there is a good chance that they will be selling it without the lens. So you might not end up with this. I wouldn't personally recommend this lens because it isn't too good for low light, which you will benefit from a lot more with the 50mm lens. As for the 1080p footage, it's still surprisingly sharp, especially with a good lens, like with the nifty 50. But at least from reviewing the footage more recently, I don't think the footage quite holds up clarity-wise from a distance. Anything beyond maybe a medium or wide shot of any people, and things start to get a bit compressed and pixelated pretty quickly. But I've actually been considering using this camera for these YouTube videos, at least for some B-cam angles, and I find that as long as you keep stuff in a close-up, it actually doesn't look that bad. It's still pretty sharp, it cuts pretty reasonably well with my A7S. It's just if you want to get wide shots, in particular of buildings or anything with detail, it quickly starts to fall apart, and it gets to a point where I couldn't really recommend this camera for picking up if you're wanting to do big landscape type videography or anything. I mean, at the end of the day, you've been watching a lot of the Canon 600D footage throughout this video. Some of it's my old short films, which are compressed because they are downloaded from YouTube, so they're not in their original quality. But I've gone out and shot some new stuff, and I've been comparing it with my A7S, which is also a reasonably old camera at this point. It's actually only 1 year younger than this 600D, because the A7S came out in 2013. So I feel like this is a good comparison, because now the A7S is roughly around the price of what I bought this 600D for back in 2012. But like budget wise, like if you're going with a cheap camera, this 600D, like you can get it for less than £200. And when it comes to close-ups in particular, I think it's not bad at all. As for physical components on the camera, it does have an HDMI out, and it does have a mic input. It's a mini jack input. Oh no, it broke my 600D. But the mic input is pretty bad, in my opinion. The hiss that you get through this thing is just so bad, it ruins any audio you try to capture through it. I quickly learned that you should be using an external recorder if you're going to be doing some serious video work with this. And with this being my original 600D from 2012, how is it holding up today? Well, it's actually not that bad. I'm actually surprised it works. I have noticed that as of now, it does have 2 dead pixels on the sensor. I mean, in terms of quality, the image has always had this weird cardboard texture. It doesn't seem to always show up. I don't know if it's something to do with different ISO settings or anything. There is also some aliasing on fine details in the image, most notably on buildings at a distance. So yeah, like brickwork, or as with the case here, I think it's the netting that is put on the building. You can't even tell it's there in this footage, but it has green netting around the building or something. As well as the cardboard texture and aliasing, it does have very limited dynamic range. I mean, nobody's surprised by this, obviously, but I actually kind of love the contrast of this camera. We now live in a digital age where digital cameras are at a point where their sensors are so good with dynamic range that you can see everything. From the highest brights to the lowest darks, you can see all the detail at both ends and everything in between. Which is good, gives you more stuff to work with in post in particular, but I really like the contrast. So it's kind of always suited my personal preference. Of course, it's also worth keeping in mind that any footage I show that was shot before this past 2 weeks will be graded because I don't have access to the original files, and it is also compressed because a lot of these I've taken from YouTube or Vimeo. And despite what you might think about this having bad low light or whatever, some of my best shots were shot on this camera. I mean, probably the best thing I ever shot with this camera was this firework event. Now, this was probably about 9 years ago, and it's obviously an extreme low light condition setup. I believe it's on my 50mm lens, and I can't believe it was shot on this camera. Like, there's not really that much digital noise to it. I'm not actually sure what I shot this at in terms of ISO, but I can't imagine it being that high. I'd imagine the 50mm lens was stopped down to f1.8. Having a proper DSLR was actually crucial to me in properly learning how to make short films, and especially in developing my own independent filmmaking skills. I was always wanting to shoot films with my friends at the time, and we're talking about in secondary school. That's when I got my Canon. We didn't have film school or anything like that. We weren't formally being taught how to make films. It was all in my own personal time through watching YouTube videos or just practicing in general, and the Canon 600D played such a crucial role in that because it was a massive upgrade over the camcorder I was using before, where all you could really do is zoom. The manual settings on that were horrible. You couldn't really do much with it at all. But now I could feel like a real filmmaker for a change. And this carried on into college as well. Even though I went to study film studies at college, I was still making films with my friends outside of it. And the same can be said for university. And I think I created my best work in these times. And of course, I needed my own camera to do that. Not everybody does end up having their own camera, and I think it really does play such a crucial role in developing your filmmaking skills. With the Canon 600D, I made so many short films in my own time, most of which didn't actually get finished or released anywhere, but I I have so many good memories of making weird little silly things with my friends, sometimes a bit too seriously, but some of those films actually got put into film festivals as well. I entered some film writer competitions with stuff that I shot on this camera. I did my art degree submission film with this camera, which is a story in of itself. I was the only one that was doing a film related thing. Basically, my teacher was just basically like, hey, we know you're pretty stupid when it comes to the thing that you're actually meant to do, which was something to do with music festivals at the time. And he was like, we know you like filmmaking, just go make a little film for us instead. And I was like, okay. And I went and made a film. And I've also done a ton of YouTube related work over the last 10 years with this camera. I shot my friends' short films with this camera. I shot freelance using this camera. I shot my first documentary on this camera. There's so many things that I did with this particular model. And the thing is, so many people just disregard these cheaper, more entry-level type cameras because they think, oh, it doesn't have the specs of like the mainline cameras, that it's just basically not worth even picking up, even if you are just trying to start out. I disagree with that. I probably wouldn't be where I am today without this camera. If I'd have just waited around until the day that I could afford something much bigger, I probably wouldn't have made half the stuff that I made in that time. I might not have got some of those films into film festivals. I probably wouldn't have developed my YouTube skills as much. I definitely wouldn't have developed my filmmaking skills as much. And now that we're in 2025, I really do think I might start using this again. Not as my main camera or anything, but more as my B cam to my A cam. Because yeah, if I was doing a proper professional shoot, I'd probably rent out some gear or find a way of getting some higher end gear. But for like my YouTube stuff like this, or maybe a little documentary that I'm going to be working on soon in my own personal time, I could use a second camera, and honestly this one isn't that bad, even 13 years later. Oh, I'm in the sun. Is that where the sun is? Am I in the sun? Is that the sun?
I really hope this is what you wanted.